It always starts with a whisper, doesn't it? One rumor, one careless sentence said behind closed doors, and suddenly, the walls start to shake. In Hollywood, whispers can destroy an empire. And when those whispers have Meghan Markle's name attached to them, they don't just echo, they roar. Because long before the Duchess, before the royal titles, before she turned herself into one of the most polarizing figures on the planet, Meghan Markle was something else entirely. Ambitious, calculated, and, according to her ex-husband Trevor Engelson, dangerously secretive. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Tonight, we're not talking about tiaras or palace drama. We're peeling back the perfectly polished image, the speeches about empowerment, the tears on Oprah, the curated Instagram moments, and diving into something raw, messy, and scandalous. The kind of story Meghan thought she'd buried forever. Because Trevor Engelson, the man who once knew her better than anyone else, has allegedly decided that the world deserves to know who she really was before the fame, before the crown, before the lies. And what he revealed, it's something no royal PR team could ever spin away. He says Meghan Markle wasn't just a social climber. She was a puck bunny. Now, if you don't know the term, buckle up. In the world of professional hockey, puck bunny is not a compliment. It's a label for women who follow hockey players. Not for the sport, but for the players themselves. Women who slip backstage after games, who know which locker room door to knock on, who trade charm for attention, and in some cases, something far more intimate. But the real question is this: how did a woman who now lectures about dignity and privacy allegedly end up entangled with 5 players from the same team in one unforgettable night? That's what Trevor claims to have uncovered. And the deeper you go into his side of the story, the more it sounds like a Hollywood screenplay. Except this time, Meghan isn't the heroine. It all started years before she met Prince Harry, before she was a duchess, before the world even cared who Meghan Markle was. She was just another ambitious actress trying to claw her way up the brutal ladder of Los Angeles entertainment. She had charm, no doubt. But behind the smile was something else, a fire that burned a little too hot, a hunger that never stopped. And Trevor Engelson was there to witness it all. He met her when she was still fighting for small TV parts, guest roles, commercials, anything to stay visible. He saw the drive that both inspired and frightened him. To Trevor, Meghan was magnetic. She could walk into a room full of strangers and make them feel like they'd known her for years. But as he would later confess to close friends, her kindness sometimes felt like performance. Trevor once told a colleague, "With Meghan, you could never tell where the act ended and the person began." And maybe that's where the trouble began. Because in Hollywood, every relationship, every friendship, every party can double as an opportunity. Meghan knew that. She studied people, their status, their influence. And one night, at a charity gala attended by a handful of professional athletes, she allegedly set her sights on a new circle, one far more glamorous than her usual crowd. That's where the story of the hockey players begins. Picture the scene: a private event in downtown LA, dim lights, laughter bouncing off the walls, glasses clinking, cameras forbidden, phones tucked away. The kind of night where everyone pretends secrets don't exist. Meghan was there, dazzling, confident, magnetic in that signature way that made people turn their heads. But there was something else in her eyes that night, something sharper. According to Trevor, that was the night Meghan's obsession with elite athletes began. Not for the sport, not for the excitement, but for the access, the validation, the power that came from being seen next to men who already had fame. Trevor didn't think much of it at first. They were married by then, and he trusted her, or at least he wanted to. But then, the whispers started. A teammate's girlfriend mentioned something strange. Someone else brought up a rumor about Meghan hanging out with half the team at an after-party. At first, Trevor brushed it off. Jealousy, gossip, he thought. But the thing about whispers is, they always find a way to grow louder. And then came the night that changed everything. According to people close to Trevor, he received a message, a simple text, from an unknown number. No words, just a photo. And in that photo, a familiar smile. Meghan's. The problem? The setting wasn't familiar at all. It looked like a locker room. Jerseys on hooks. Equipment bags on the floor. 5 hockey players laughing, shirtless, sweaty. And Meghan, right in the center. That was the moment Trevor's world cracked. He didn't confront her immediately. He watched. He waited. He looked for the truth, for some explanation that would make it all go away. But every attempt to talk about it ended the same way, with Meghan deflecting, charming, twisting the narrative until Trevor was the one left apologizing. But deep down, something inside him knew. And years later, when Meghan rose to global fame as the wife of a prince, Trevor allegedly confided to a friend, "The world worships her, but if they knew what I knew, they'd never call her a role model again." That's where this story takes its turn. Because Trevor didn't just let go of the past. He archived it. He saved emails, messages, photos, things he thought he'd never use, but kept anyway. And recently, according to insider reports, those private files began to circulate among people who once worked with Meghan in her Hollywood days. In one of those files, labeled Locker Room Night, Trevor had written 3 simple words: 5 players, 1 secret. He never explained what it meant. Until now. But let's pause for a second. Because here's the bigger question. Why now? Why would Trevor, after years of silence, suddenly choose to speak? Maybe it's revenge. Maybe it's closure. Or maybe, just maybe, he's tired of watching someone rewrite history at his expense. Because when Meghan reinvented herself as a duchess, she didn't just change her name. She rewrote her past. She turned Hollywood ambition into royal victimhood, love stories into PR campaigns. But Trevor's version doesn't fit that fairy tale. And if what he's saying is true, it's not just about a night with hockey players. It's about deception, ego, and how far someone is willing to go to protect their image. Some of the men allegedly involved have since gone silent. One has reportedly moved abroad. Another left social media entirely after an anonymous message appeared under one of his old posts that simply read, "Puck Bunny." It was deleted within minutes. But screenshots last forever. In the underground gossip circuits of LA, this story has been resurrected like a ghost. And the timing couldn't be worse for Meghan. With her projects faltering, her public image bruised, and her ties to the royal family all but severed, the last thing she needs is her past catching up to her. Yet here we are. Because Trevor isn't holding back anymore. Sources close to him claim he's been approached for a tell-all series, something that digs deep into the real Meghan. Before the fame, before the royals, before the reinvention. And if even half of what's being whispered is true, Meghan's entire brand, the philanthropist, the feminist icon, the survivor, could crumble overnight. But let's be honest, scandals don't destroy people. They reveal them. The truth is, this isn't just about Meghan's alleged relationships or her reputation. It's about what happens when someone builds an empire on control, control of narrative, control of image, control of people, and then loses that control. Because control has always been Meghan's currency. Every gesture, every headline, every carefully chosen word. But this time, Trevor holds the one thing she can't control, the past. And it's that past that's about to come crashing into her carefully curated present. Now imagine Meghan's reaction when she first heard Trevor was talking again. That old panic, that dread of secrets resurfacing, the fear that the old version of her, the one she thought she'd buried, was clawing its way back to the surface. People close to her say she's been pacing, making calls, demanding answers. Others claim she's warned her lawyers to prepare for war. Because if Trevor really has proof, if he can back up his claims, then it won't just be gossip anymore. It'll be scandal. Scandal on a royal scale. And you know what happens when royal scandals meet American entertainment media? They explode. So here we are, standing at the edge of 2 timelines. The glamorous duchess and the forgotten actress. One built on power, the other buried under secrets. And Trevor Engelson? He's the bridge between them. The man who knew both Meghans. The one who saw the transformation up close. And who now says he can prove it wasn't as innocent as she claims. Because according to Trevor, the night Meghan allegedly crossed that line with 5 hockey players wasn't just another Hollywood rumor. It was the moment everything changed, the night that turned a struggling actress into something else entirely. And now, as he prepares to speak out publicly, Meghan's entire world seems to be trembling again. But the question is, why did she do it? What drove her to it? Power? Attention? Revenge? Or was it something deeper? A need to prove she could have anyone, control anyone, outshine everyone? Those answers, Trevor says, are coming. And when they do, no one will look at Meghan Markle the same way again. Because the past always has a way of catching up, and this time, it's wearing skates. What really happened in that locker room? What evidence does Trevor actually have? And why is Meghan reportedly terrified now, years after the fact? That's where our story begins. Because in the world of fame and royalty, one truth remains: secrets can make you powerful. But once exposed, they can destroy you. And for Meghan Markle, that destruction might already be in motion. But what Trevor Engelson reveals next will change everything. Because this time, he's not whispering. He's ready to shout. And the sound of that truth, it's going to echo all the way to Buckingham Palace. What came next would shake the royal walls, drag hidden names into the spotlight, and expose a side of Meghan that no one was ever supposed to see. But to understand how it all unfolded, we have to start with that fateful night. The night that started it all. It was supposed to be a simple night out, an evening of laughter, champagne, and celebration. Los Angeles was glowing, neon, and alive. A city that never slept because ambition never rested. The air outside the rooftop bar on Sunset Boulevard was warm, perfumed with spilled wine and expensive perfume. It was the kind of place where careers were made or destroyed before midnight. And in the middle of it all, there she was, Meghan Markle. At that time, Meghan wasn't a duchess or a global headline. She was a rising actress, pretty, poised, and painfully aware of how fragile her fame was. She'd scored a few decent roles, flirted with the idea of bigger parts, and convinced herself she was on the cusp of something great. But Hollywood is cruel to those who wait. You either climb fast or get forgotten. That night, Meghan wasn't planning to be forgotten. She arrived late, as she often did, making sure every head turned when she walked in. A shimmering gold dress, confident stride, a rehearsed smile that made everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room. She knew how to command attention, not by shouting, but by appearing effortlessly magnetic. And somewhere among the flashing lights and laughter stood Trevor Engelson, producer, husband, and at that time, her biggest supporter. Trevor wasn't flashy. He didn't crave the spotlight. He preferred to stay behind the scenes, orchestrating success for others. He had produced small films, had connections, and genuinely believed Meghan had that it factor. He told friends she was going to be the next big thing. He said it with pride, with love, with the confidence of a man who thought he was building a future with a star. But the truth? Meghan had started seeing Trevor as something else entirely, a stepping stone. Behind the smile and charm, Meghan's mind was always working. Every event was a chessboard. Every handshake, a move. Every flirtatious laugh, a test. That night was no exception. Because that night, the party was sponsored by a major sports agency that represented several athletes, football players, basketball stars, and, notably, a few members of a professional hockey team that had just won the West Coast Cup. Trevor noticed her shift immediately. The moment the players walked in, Meghan's body language changed. Her tone softened. Her laugh became lighter, her gaze more deliberate. It was as if the atmosphere itself had tilted in their direction. Trevor brushed it off at first. Meghan was charismatic, and he'd always known she loved attention. But something about the way she watched those players, like a hunter studying its prey, made him uneasy. And he wasn't alone. A few guests later recalled the same thing. Meghan, drifting away from Trevor's side, moving through the crowd like silk, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, touching arms when she didn't need to, holding eye contact just a little too long. One of the players, a tall, broad-shouldered forward, was instantly smitten. He'd just come off a winning streak and was basking in newfound celebrity. He had the arrogance of someone used to being adored. Meghan saw it. She knew that type well, and she played into it perfectly. By midnight, Trevor had lost sight of her. She was somewhere near the VIP corner, surrounded by players, smiling like she belonged there. When he finally found her again, she was holding a glass of champagne and laughing with one of them, her hand resting casually on his shoulder. Trevor approached, forcing a polite smile, and she turned toward him with that same effortless charm. "Oh, honey, come meet my new friends," she said, as if nothing were strange. But something was strange. The way they looked at her. The way she looked back. Trevor didn't say anything that night. He wasn't the jealous type. But deep down, something shifted, a quiet discomfort that would grow into something far darker. Later, on their drive home, Meghan scrolled through her phone, smiling faintly. When Trevor asked what was funny, she said, Oh, just something one of the guys said. She didn't mention that one of them had already texted her privately. Weeks passed. Meghan became more distant. She claimed it was work stress, the endless auditions, the frustration of rejection. Trevor believed her, at least at first. But her schedule changed too. Late-night meetings, random networking events, more and more unexplained absences. Friends started to notice the tension. One mutual acquaintance later said, Trevor looked like a man trying to hold on to a tornado. And the tornado had a name, Meghan Markle. Behind closed doors, their arguments grew sharper. Trevor couldn't understand why she was pulling away. Meghan couldn't understand why he was still asking questions. To her, emotional detachment was control. To him, it was confusion. And then came the charity gala, the same one that would later become the backdrop for whispered stories of her connection to hockey players. It wasn't an ordinary event. This was the kind of gathering where sports met Hollywood, where fame collided with fortune. Cameras weren't allowed, but everyone there had secrets worth protecting. Meghan arrived dressed in silver that night, catching the light like a mirror. Trevor, ever supportive, stayed close, introducing her to sponsors, filmmakers, and guests. But the moment she spotted the group of hockey players across the room, her attention flickered again. Trevor noticed. Of course, he noticed. He tried to ignore it, but as the evening went on, Meghan's laughter drifted from one circle to another until, eventually, she was seated near the athletes, while Trevor lingered by the bar, sipping his drink in silence. One of the players made a toast. Meghan clapped, eyes bright, the picture of charm. When Trevor walked over to check in, she barely acknowledged him. I'm just networking, she whispered. Networking. That word would haunt him later. The gala ended late. Meghan was one of the last to leave. She said she had been talking to a producer about a potential role, but Trevor later discovered the producer had left 2 hours earlier. And when he asked where she'd been, she smiled faintly and said, Don't be paranoid. But paranoia has a way of becoming prophecy, because a few days later, Trevor received that anonymous message. A single photo, blurry but unmistakable. The team logo on the wall, the familiar curve of Meghan's smile, the unmistakable intimacy of the setting. A locker room. Trevor didn't react immediately. He stared at the screen for minutes that felt like hours. His chest tightened, his hands went cold. He thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was Photoshop. But the more he stared, the less he believed that. When he finally confronted her, Meghan denied everything. She accused him of not trusting her, of being insecure, of letting gossip poison their marriage. Her voice trembled just enough to make it sound real. But Trevor had seen that tremble before, on set, when she rehearsed emotional scenes. That night, he couldn't sleep. He replayed every conversation, every glance, every networking event. And somewhere between midnight and sunrise, the truth settled in like a cold stone. He didn't really know the woman he'd married. Still, he stayed. He wanted to believe it was all misunderstanding. Love does that to people. It makes them blind on purpose. But Hollywood doesn't keep secrets for long. A few weeks later, one of Trevor's acquaintances, someone who worked in sports PR, pulled him aside and said quietly, I don't know how to tell you this, but people are talking. About Meghan. About a party after the game. Trevor felt the room tilt. He tried to ask questions, but the man shook his head. You don't want to know, mate. Just keep your head down. But Trevor did want to know. He needed to know. He started piecing things together. Dates, texts, sudden schedule changes. And all roads led back to the same group of hockey players. 5 of them. Same team. Same night. That was the moment something inside Trevor broke. Because no matter how much he tried to rationalize it, no matter how many times he told himself it couldn't be true, the timeline didn't lie. And Meghan? She didn't either. Not anymore. In public, she was radiant. Red carpets, interviews, a rising star on the brink of mainstream success. But behind closed doors, Trevor could see the cracks. The defensiveness, the guilt, the constant fear that someone might find out. And for the first time, he began to wonder, was Meghan Markle's greatest role the one she played in real life? Because every word, every gesture, every perfectly measured response seemed scripted. He once caught her practicing smiles in the mirror before an event. It's not fake, she said. It's called being prepared. But prepared for what? For fame? For lies? For reinvention? Maybe all of it. As weeks turned into months, the silence between them grew. The marriage that had started with such promise began to feel like a performance they were both tired of acting in. Trevor tried to bury the rumors, to forgive what he couldn't prove, but the ghost of that night never left him. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. Because secrets have gravity. They pull everything toward them. And somewhere in the shadows of Los Angeles, Meghan Markle's past was about to collide with her future. The whispers would grow louder. The evidence would resurface. The players would start to talk. And when they did, the world would finally see the version of Meghan that Trevor had known all along. The one who could charm anyone, manipulate everyone, and hide everything. But what Trevor didn't realize yet was that this scandal wasn't just about betrayal. It was about transformation. Because that night at the gala, when Meghan crossed paths with those players, she didn't just break her vows. She built her armor. She learned how to weaponize charm, how to twist rumors into opportunity, how to turn shame into silence. And that skill, the ability to outmaneuver truth, would carry her straight into the arms of royalty years later. But in this story, everything comes full circle. Because while Meghan thought the past had been buried, Trevor knew better. And as he would later say to a friend, Hollywood doesn't bury secrets. It archives them. The night of the hockey players wasn't the end of their marriage. It was the beginning of the legend she would one day use to conquer the world. They called him the Quiet One, the man behind the curtain, the one who never needed the spotlight. Trevor Engelson didn't crave attention. He wasn't born into privilege, didn't have royal blood, didn't seek public validation. He built everything he had with quiet persistence. While others shouted their success, Trevor simply worked. But love, especially the kind he had for Meghan Markle, can make even the most grounded man lose balance. When he first met her, she was electric. She carried herself like someone already famous, even though at that time, she was just another name on a call sheet. There was a light around her that felt intoxicating. Trevor fell fast, the way dreamers do. He thought she was genuine. Thought her laughter came from truth, not strategy. He couldn't have known that he was falling for an illusion. In those early years, Trevor was Meghan's biggest champion. He introduced her to producers, gave her a taste of Hollywood's inner circle, and reassured her when roles didn't come. He believed in her talent, yes, but more than that, he believed in her. And for a while, everything looked perfect. They were the golden couple of small-scale Hollywood, a young producer and a rising actress. Power and beauty, ambition and charm, a fairy tale that looked ready to go the distance. But behind that fairy tale, Trevor was starting to notice things. Small inconsistencies, tiny fractures in the story Meghan told about herself. She had a habit of rewriting her past, shifting details to make them sound more flattering. A high school teacher became a mentor. A minor role became a breakthrough. Every success was exaggerated, every failure reframed as a conspiracy. Trevor laughed it off at first. Everyone in Hollywood embellished a little. It was part of survival. But Meghan's version of reality didn't just change, it evolved. What she couldn't control, she deleted. And that habit didn't stop with her career. Trevor began to realize that Meghan managed their relationship like a production. There were rehearsed lines, planned moments of affection, even strategic displays of vulnerability. When she cried, it always seemed timed. When she apologized, it felt memorized. But love blinds even the perceptive. Trevor ignored the gut feeling that something wasn't right. He focused on work, convinced that stability would keep their marriage strong. Until the rumors started. When the whispers about the hockey players reached him, Trevor's instinct wasn't anger, it was disbelief. He knew Meghan had admirers. He'd seen how people looked at her, how easily she wrapped men around her finger. But he never believed she'd crossed that line. Then came that photograph. The blurry locker room image. The one that made his stomach drop. He didn't confront her right away. Instead, he started looking for patterns. Text messages she hid, calls she took in another room, sudden bursts of secrecy. He noticed how she guarded her phone like it contained nuclear codes. One evening, as she showered, Trevor glanced at her phone on the nightstand. A single notification flashed across the screen. Good luck tomorrow, superstar. The name attached? One of the hockey players. Trevor didn't open it. He didn't need to. The message was clear enough. Later that night, he asked, casually, "You talk to those hockey guys much?" She didn't flinch. Of course. They're friends now. You know how networking works, babe. Networking. That word again. The word that made his chest tighten. Still, he said nothing. Because Trevor wasn't the kind of man to explode. He was the kind of man who watched, who remembered, who filed things away quietly. And that quiet would become his greatest weapon. When their marriage began to crumble, Trevor didn't scream. He didn't drag her name through the mud. He retreated. He became the observer, the keeper of truths no one else knew. He saw her transformation happen in real time. The woman he'd married, the warm, ambitious actress who laughed at his terrible jokes, was disappearing. In her place stood someone colder, more calculating. He remembered one argument vividly. Meghan had just returned from a networking trip that turned into a week-long absence. When she came home, Trevor asked where she'd really been. She smiled, kissed his cheek, and said, "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to." The chill in her voice froze him. That was when Trevor realized something crucial. Meghan didn't fear losing him. She feared losing control. And once he understood that, everything changed. He started keeping notes, emails, messages, not to expose her, but to understand her. He wanted to see the pattern for himself, to know if he was truly crazy or if the world's most charming woman was, in fact, a master manipulator. Those files, the ones that would later leak into Hollywood's rumor mill, began here, in quiet folders labeled with neutral names, schedule, contacts, expenses. But inside those folders were glimpses into something far more personal. Photos from events where she claimed not to have gone. Receipts from hotels she never mentioned. Messages that began friendly and turned flirtatious. And every time he thought he had enough proof to confront her, he couldn't do it. Because even then, despite everything, he still loved her. He once told a friend over drinks, "It's like living with smoke. You can see it, smell it, feel it, but when you try to grab it, it disappears." That was Meghan, intangible and untouchable. When the marriage finally collapsed, Meghan spun the narrative instantly. She painted herself as the victim of neglect, of emotional distance, of a man who didn't understand her dreams. And people believed her. They always did. Trevor didn't fight back. He signed the papers, packed up his life, and walked away. But walking away didn't mean forgetting. Because you don't just forget being betrayed. You don't forget the nights of doubt, the humiliations, the secrets whispered behind your back. You don't forget when the woman you loved turned your trust into her disguise. Trevor went silent, but not idle. He focused on his career, built new projects, moved on outwardly. But deep down, he was still haunted by the feeling that one day, her past would catch up to her. And then, it happened. When Meghan became engaged to Prince Harry, Trevor's phone buzzed nonstop. Messages poured in from mutual acquaintances, journalists, even ex-friends who hadn't spoken to him in years. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. "What do you think?" Trevor said nothing, not a word. But inside, he was stunned. Not because she was marrying a prince, but because she had erased him entirely from her story. No mention of the years they shared. No acknowledgement of the man who had supported her through rejection after rejection. It was as if he'd never existed. And yet, the moment her royal relationship became public, the old files started whispering again. People who'd worked with Meghan in her pre-royal years remembered things. Conversations. Names. Nights. Including that infamous one, the locker room story that refused to die. Trevor never confirmed or denied it publicly. But those close to him said he never dismissed it either. When asked if it was real, he would simply pause, take a slow breath, and say, "There's a lot the world doesn't know." It was that quiet confidence that scared Meghan more than any rumor. Because silence can be louder than accusation. Trevor's restraint made people curious. What was he hiding? What did he know? Why wasn't he speaking? And that curiosity became a fire that Meghan couldn't control. Her PR team scrambled to scrub anything that hinted at her Hollywood past. Old photos vanished. Online records were updated. Former friends were paid to stay quiet. But as they say, nothing truly disappears from the internet or from memory. Then, one day, a journalist who had known Trevor back in his early producing days contacted him discreetly. The journalist had been digging into Meghan's pre-royal life for a story that would never see daylight without Trevor's input. The man asked, "Trevor, if you could tell the world one thing about her, what would it be?" Trevor paused. Then he said something chilling. "Don't believe her innocence. It's a brand, not a truth." That quote never made it to print, but it spread quietly through industry circles. And soon, Whispers became conversations. Conversations became calls. Calls became meetings. And within months, Meghan's perfect public image began showing cracks. But even then, Trevor wasn't out for revenge. He wasn't leaking information for fame. He wasn't seeking money or headlines. He just wanted the record to exist. The truth to live somewhere beyond her carefully polished narrative. He once told a confidant, "I don't need to ruin her. She's doing that herself." Yet, as time passed and Meghan's royal drama dominated the world, Trevor began to realize that silence wasn't enough anymore. She was rewriting not just her story, but his. He watched her speak about toxic environments, about unfair treatment, about breaking free from control. He recognized the irony instantly. Because to him, Meghan had always been the controller, the manipulator, the orchestrator. And that was when he decided enough was enough. If she wanted to play queen of narratives, he would finally bring receipts. It started with private conversations, trusted friends, people who had seen her behavior firsthand. Slowly, piece by piece, Trevor began to rebuild the puzzle for them, the real Meghan. The one who used affection like currency. The one who charmed 5 hockey players into silence. The one who crafted tears for sympathy and smiles for survival. And as more people began to listen, a dangerous momentum started to build. Because once the truth begins to leak, you can't contain it. Trevor wasn't shouting. He didn't have to. Others were doing it for him. Former assistants, PR insiders, event coordinators who remembered the locker room night. And Meghan? She could feel it. The panic behind her calm exterior returned. Late-night calls to lawyers. Frantic instructions to scrub mentions. Private investigators reportedly hired to trace leaks. But the problem wasn't the leaks. It was Trevor himself. Because he wasn't acting out of spite anymore. He was acting out of principle. In his words, if you build a castle on lies, don't be surprised when the truth kicks down the door. And now, as that truth began creeping closer to the palace walls, Meghan's fear became visible. Every new whisper, every resurfaced image, every passing mention of Trevor's name sent her spiraling. Because Trevor Engelson wasn't just the man she left. He was the man who knew too much. And what he was about to reveal next, the contents of those secret files, the testimonies of those 5 players, the untold nights of Hollywood indulgence, would make everything she built tremble. The Duchess had outrun many scandals before. But this one wasn't coming from tabloids or trolls. It was coming from someone who once loved her. And that kind of truth cuts deeper than any headline. The term, Puck Bunny, wasn't something you'd find in a dictionary, and for good reason. It was slang, one of those phrases that hockey players and their fans tossed around at locker rooms, bars, and after parties when the drinks flowed a little too freely. The term itself was simple, even playful on the surface. A woman who had a fondness for hockey players, often to the point of obsession. But the reality behind it? That was far from innocent. Meghan Markle, long before she wore a crown, was allegedly labeled with that very term. And not just by 1 or 2 disillusioned fans. It came from people who had seen her in action, who had watched as she moved through those same spaces, charming and laughing her way through the nightlife that came with proximity to fame. It wasn't just that she attended a few hockey games or made small talk with some players. No, this was far deeper. The accusations weren't centered around a single evening or a fleeting encounter. No, the truth, or rather the version of it slowly making its way to the surface, suggested something more elaborate. Meghan, at the height of her Hollywood ambition, allegedly found herself in the thick of the party culture that swirled around sports figures. The term Puck Bunny emerged in conversations about her because, according to insiders, she was known to frequent the same circles, moving easily between athletes, charming them one by one, while remaining just enigmatic enough to keep them hooked. It all started innocuously enough. A few celebrity-filled charity events, some meetings set up by her publicists, a dash of Hollywood magic. But then things escalated. Meghan, it seemed, didn't just want to be around the hockey stars. She wanted to be with them. It was common knowledge in LA that players from the top teams didn't just attend charity events. They hosted them. They mingled with the rich, the famous, and the most powerful women in the room. The ones who knew that their looks and their connections were just as valuable as the millions in the players' bank accounts. Trevor had seen it happen. One night, when they were both invited to a post-game celebration, He noticed how Meghan gravitated toward the athletes with the biggest contracts. She flirted with the ones whose names were on billboards, whose every move was followed by fans and media alike. It wasn't subtle. It was purposeful. And it didn't stop with a handshake or a polite conversation. No, it went deeper. As the evening wore on, she was seen laughing in a small group with several of the team's players, all of them a little too close for comfort. Trevor didn't say anything, but the way they looked at her, those hockey players, told him everything he needed to know. At first, Trevor tried to rationalize it. He figured it was just part of the scene, part of the game they were all playing. Hollywood loved a good story, a juicy headline, and Meghan was still climbing her way to the top. The world, as he saw it, wasn't kind to women who wanted more. It made them fight for it, claw for it. And if a little flirting with a few high-profile men helped, then maybe it was just part of the job. But when he learned of the so-called after-party, everything started to fall into place. It was just another typical LA event. Drinks were flowing, the music was loud, and everyone was feeling good. But by the end of the night, the attendees were whittled down to a smaller, more intimate group. The most famous hockey players in the city, plus a few others from out of town, including a rising star who had just signed a new contract worth millions. And in the middle of it all, Meghan. Trevor was told, later on, that at this private gathering, Meghan had found herself at the center of the attention, not as the casual observer, but as someone who had everyone's eyes on her. She was laughing and talking, exchanging jokes with the players. But according to several witnesses, what began as lighthearted fun soon turned into something more dangerous, more intimate. It wasn't just her conversation that made her stand out. It was the way she moved through the group. Subtle touches, long eye contact, an occasional whisper that made heads turn. She was more than just an observer of the scene, she was the scene. One source, who had been there, later revealed that the players weren't just chatting with Meghan. They were competing for her attention. It was described as a scene out of a movie, players taking turns talking to her, trying to outdo one another with jokes, personal stories, and inside information about the team. As the night wore on, it became clearer to everyone in the room that this wasn't just friendly banter. This was a carefully executed game, and Meghan was the queen. But when the clock struck midnight, things took an unexpected turn. Several of the hockey players went missing from the party, and word spread quickly that they had retreated to a nearby hotel suite. The whispers were hushed, but they were there nonetheless. Meghan wasn't seen with them, but she was unaccounted for as well. According to insiders, that hotel suite would become the backdrop for something no one would soon forget. Trevor didn't know the details at the time. What he knew was that the following week, rumors started to circulate. Players were talking. And when they started talking, people listened. Some of them went quiet, but a few spoke in hushed tones to trusted friends. They mentioned Meghan's name. They alluded to something that had gone on in that suite, something more than just a few drinks. It wasn't until later, much later, that Trevor would hear the full story. And when he did, it shattered whatever illusions he had left about the woman he thought he knew. One player, after much prodding from a close friend, revealed the truth. Meghan hadn't just been in that suite with one player, she'd been with 5 of them, all from the same team. And she hadn't just spent time with them. According to the account, she had become the center of their attention, drawing them in with a combination of charm, flirtation, and something more seductive. The details were hazy, but what was clear was this. The Puck Bunny label wasn't just a rumor, it was a reality. At first, Trevor couldn't wrap his mind around it. 5 players? In one night? It seemed impossible. But as he dug deeper and began piecing together the fragments of whispered conversations, the picture became more complete. Meghan had used her allure like a weapon, targeting the hockey players who were at the top of their game, the ones who had the power, the fame, and the wealth she wanted. In Hollywood, it's not uncommon for relationships to be transactional. Men and women use each other as stepping stones, as ways to climb higher in their careers, to stay relevant. But this wasn't about casual flirtation or opportunistic dates. It was something more calculated. Meghan, Trevor now realized, had mastered the art of manipulation. She didn't just get close to these players, she played them. And for what? Power? Influence? Attention? To Trevor, it was all too clear. Meghan had crossed a line that could never be erased. She hadn't just been another actress looking for a role. She had been a woman, searching for a way to gain power, to get ahead, and to make sure the world never forgot her name. The hockey players? They were just one chapter in her story of manipulation. And Trevor? He was left to watch from the sidelines as Meghan, the woman he once loved, carved a path for herself through lies, flattery, and seduction. But the story didn't end with the players or with Trevor's disbelief. The real consequences were only just beginning. Because once rumors like this start to spread, there's no going back. The Puck Bunny narrative became a part of Meghan's history, whether she liked it or not. And no matter how hard she tried to silence it, the truth, however fragmented, was already out there. And as Trevor would soon discover, this scandal wasn't just a part of Meghan's past. It was a ticking time bomb waiting to explode in the public eye. But as the whispers reached the right people, Meghan's secrets, her real story, were beginning to come into focus. In Hollywood, nothing stays private for long, not even the most personal of secrets. The city thrives on whispers, on gossip, and on the relentless desire to be seen. But some stories, some truths, are more dangerous than others. And when it came to the night Meghan Markle allegedly spent with 5 hockey players, it wasn't just another Hollywood rumor. This was a story too explosive to be ignored, too scandalous to be buried, and, most importantly, too real to be denied. It all started, as most Hollywood stories do, with a party. The night was full of promise, the kind of evening that most people would only dream of attending. The venue was an exclusive members-only club in West Hollywood, one of those places where the doors are guarded by security and the guest list is more coveted than any Oscar nomination. It was the sort of event that attracted athletes, celebrities, and anyone who could afford the hefty price tag for admission to the VIP area. The hockey team in question was at the peak of their popularity. Their victory had made headlines, their fame soaring higher than the rest of the league. And like any group of young athletes, they were more than willing to celebrate their success in the public eye. Meghan, who had been orbiting the sports scene for months, was drawn to them like a magnet. After all, it was no secret that hockey players, like many athletes, lived for attention, for admiration, and for the thrill of the chase. But Meghan wasn't chasing just any athlete. She was after the power that came with the association. She knew that rubbing elbows with athletes of this caliber wasn't just about fun. It was about positioning herself in the right rooms, around the right people, and securing the spotlight she craved. That night, she was more than just a participant in the party. She was the life of it. Trevor, who had been invited as part of the evening's festivities, watched from a distance. He saw Meghan laughing a little too easily, making eye contact a little too often, her smile a little too sharp. He'd seen this before, her ability to capture the attention of everyone in the room, to make them feel like they were the only person who mattered. He never thought it would extend to this world of athletes who, in his mind, were just as wrapped up in their fame as she was. But as the night wore on, Trevor's unease began to grow. He watched as Meghan drifted further from him, moving toward the group of hockey players. There was a palpable energy between them, an energy Trevor could feel but couldn't quite place. And then, without realizing it, he found himself pushed to the outer edges of the party, forgotten in the chaos as Meghan took center stage. One of the players, her target of the evening, was a defenseman with an impressive reputation both on and off the ice. He was known for his brute force, his on-ice toughness, and his ability to charm just about anyone off the rink. He had a reputation for being a ladies' man, and the room buzzed with the knowledge that he had just signed a multi-million-dollar contract with a brand-new endorsement deal. For Meghan, it was an opportunity she couldn't pass up. She knew how to play the game. She knew how to make herself the center of attention. She had learned early on in Hollywood that the most powerful people didn't just enter rooms, they owned them. As the night unfolded, Meghan's interactions with this player became more and more intimate, if not in the literal sense, then certainly in the psychological one. It wasn't long before others began to notice the dynamic between them. Meghan leaning in a little too close, the player's hand lingering on her lower back, both of them laughing just a little too loudly. It wasn't just one. It was 5. The group of players, once a collective unit, became separate entities, each vying for Meghan's attention in their own way. What started as a shared joke became a silent competition for her gaze, for her touch, for her words. And Meghan, ever the tactician, played each of them like a symphony. She knew what they wanted. She knew exactly how to give it to them. She flirted with the defenseman, then turned her attention to a winger who had a reputation for being the life of the party. She listened intently to a center who was talking about his future in the league, his contract negotiations, the way the spotlight was just starting to shine brighter on him. She made them all feel special, as if they were the most important person in the room. She kept them hooked, just enough to ensure she was the one everyone wanted. And when the after-party kicked off at a nearby luxury hotel, that's when things truly began to shift. The group of players, Meghan included, made their way to the private suite, a space far removed from the public eye. But whispers followed them, as they always did, trailing behind like shadows. In that suite, the lines began to blur. The night was full of alcohol, of loud music, of laughter that turned into something else entirely. What had started as friendly conversation grew more intimate, more charged. Meghan knew exactly how to keep the men interested, how to drop hints about her acting career, how to subtly boast about her connections, how to weave just enough vulnerability into her words to make them feel protective of her. She wasn't just charming them. She was controlling the narrative. The defenseman, at first the most reticent, now found himself speaking to her in a way he hadn't with anyone else that night. The more he opened up about his struggles, his fears, the more Meghan seemed to lean in, offering words of encouragement and support. It was the perfect setup for what was about to unfold. But what no one realized, not at first, was that Meghan wasn't just playing one man. She wasn't just entertaining one athlete. No, Meghan had orchestrated the whole thing. A carefully calculated series of moments designed to make each of them feel like they were the only one she wanted. As the night wore on, the alcohol flowed freely, the tension built, and the boundaries faded. The players, who had started as colleagues, now saw each other as competition, each trying to secure their place in Meghan's spotlight. But Meghan wasn't just playing them. She was playing the system. She knew exactly how to make men feel like they were winning, all while maintaining control over the narrative. The next morning, when the players woke up with foggy memories and pounding headaches, they realized they had all been part of something far more complicated than they could have imagined. They hadn't just spent the night with Meghan Markle. They had all been used, manipulated, and discarded. And the thing about athletes, especially professional ones, is they're not used to being on the losing side of a game. But what made it worse was the silence that followed. No one spoke. No one acknowledged what had happened. It was as though they were all too afraid to admit the part they'd played in it. Meghan, as was her way, seemed unaffected. She carried on with her day as if nothing had changed. She never spoke of the night again, never mentioned the players by name, never even hinted at what had truly transpired in that suite. But as Trevor Engelson would later discover, the silence wasn't just a cover-up. It was a game Meghan knew how to play better than anyone. And the thing about games is, eventually, the truth has a way of coming to light. For those 5 hockey players, what began as an innocent night out became something far more complicated. And the whispers they'd heard, the rumors they'd shrugged off, became reality. Meghan Markle wasn't just a socialite playing at being a royal. She was a master manipulator, a woman who used her charm and her beauty to play the men around her like puppets, all while spinning a story that cast her as the innocent bystander. In a world where reputations are built on carefully crafted images and secrets are kept under lock and key, it's easy to forget how fragile the truth can be. But Trevor Engelson never forgot. He knew the stakes. He understood that once something was out there, it couldn't be taken back. It wasn't that he wanted to expose Meghan for the sake of revenge. No, Trevor was far too calculated for that. But he wasn't blind either. He saw the world Meghan had built for herself, the one where everything appeared perfect, where her past was sanitized and tucked away neatly beneath layers of royal titles and carefully curated PR. The woman he married wasn't just playing a role, she was rewriting her entire life. And Trevor wasn't going to let that version of Meghan become the only version that the world would remember. So, he did something few people ever think to do. He kept records. It started out innocently enough. There were no grand plans, no carefully plotted schemes. It was just a man who had learned to protect himself in a world that could turn on you at the drop of a hat. In the beginning, it was just notes, the occasional screenshot, a few odd photos, things that Meghan didn't think twice about, things that seemed insignificant at the time. But as Meghan's career began to rise, and her relationship with Trevor started to crumble. Those small pieces began to take on more weight. Each piece of evidence Trevor had kept was like a thread, and once he started pulling on that thread, it became clear that the whole tapestry of their relationship was not as it seemed. The first thing Trevor noticed was how Meghan's relationship with the truth seemed to evolve. She was a master of the half-truth, the carefully constructed version of events that never quite matched what had actually happened. But the lies, the manipulations, they were getting harder to ignore. The night of the hockey players was just the beginning. It wasn't the only event that stood out in Trevor's mind. He began to remember other incidents, other moments that now seemed so much more telling in retrospect. The late nights, the unexplained absences, the way Meghan would go off the grid, only to return with a fabricated excuse that never quite lined up. There was the charity event, for example, where Meghan had supposedly disappeared for 2 hours. She claimed to be meeting a director about a new role, but when Trevor tried to reach her, her phone went straight to voicemail. Later, he learned from a mutual acquaintance that Meghan had actually spent that time with another hockey player, one who had a reputation for being part of a much wilder crowd than the rest of the team. Then there were the text messages. In the early days, Meghan didn't see the need to hide her phone. She had nothing to hide. At least, that's what she thought. But Trevor's curiosity got the better of him. He started noticing how Meghan would suddenly forget to mention certain meetings, or how she would dismiss phone calls when she thought he wasn't paying attention. So Trevor started doing what most people would do if they suspected something wasn't right. He snooped. What he found wasn't just the usual flirtatious banter between a woman and a man. It wasn't just harmless, "Hey, thinking of you" messages. What Trevor uncovered in Meghan's texts were plans. They were coded, subtle, but they were plans. Plans for late-night meetings. Plans for private get-togethers. And at the center of it all was one thing. Meghan Markle had a taste for the spotlight, and she was willing to do whatever it took to keep it shining on her. One of the most damning messages came from one of the hockey players who had been at the infamous after-party. The message was simple, and on the surface, it seemed innocent enough. "Good luck tomorrow, superstar." But for Trevor, it was a red flag. Why had Meghan never mentioned this player to him? Why was she so secretive about the details of that night? That was the first piece of evidence Trevor saved. He took a screenshot of the message, not because he knew it would be useful immediately, but because he knew that one day it might matter. Then came the photo. The infamous photo of Meghan in the hotel suite with 5 hockey players. It wasn't clear what exactly had transpired in that room, but the picture was enough to raise eyebrows. Meghan wasn't just sitting at a table chatting. She was positioned in the center of the group, laughing, looking comfortable, too comfortable, with the kind of intimacy that comes from knowing you're the center of attention. Trevor didn't have the ability to prove anything concrete from that picture alone, but he knew enough about Hollywood to understand that rumors like this don't exist in a vacuum. Where there's smoke, there's usually fire. And in this case, the smoke was starting to consume the very foundation of Meghan's carefully crafted public persona. So Trevor kept the photo. It wasn't that he was planning to use it. Not yet. But he was beginning to see how powerful the truth could be. And as Meghan's life continued to unfold in the public eye, first with the royal wedding, then with the ongoing drama surrounding her and Prince Harry, Trevor realized something. The truth didn't just have a way of getting out. It was already out there, in pieces, scattered across the people who had seen it firsthand. That's when Trevor made his decision. He wasn't going to let Meghan control the narrative any longer. He wasn't going to let her spin a tale where she was the victim of circumstance, where she could hide behind the facade of a fairy tale romance. The woman he had known, the woman he had loved, was not the woman the world saw on the cover of glossy magazines. And he had the evidence to prove it. But Trevor wasn't going to expose Meghan right away. He wasn't going to go on a public rampage against her. No, Trevor's strategy was far more calculated. He was going to sit back, watch, and wait. Because Trevor knew that sometimes the truth doesn't need to be shouted. Sometimes, all it needs is time. He quietly reached out to people who had worked with Meghan back in her early Hollywood days. He spoke to assistants who had been around when Meghan was climbing the social ladder. He contacted people who had witnessed her behavior at industry events, some of them not even realizing the connection to the woman they now saw on TV. The more Trevor dug, the more the pieces started to fall into place. He learned about the network of influencers Meghan had curated around her. She wasn't just climbing the ladder through acting roles. She was cultivating a network of powerful men, athletes, and executives who could provide her with the access and power she craved. As the whispers spread, as more people began to talk about her past, Trevor realized something important. Meghan Markle's carefully constructed image was starting to unravel. But what he didn't expect was that the pieces would begin to fall faster than even he could keep up with. People who had never spoken out before started sending him messages, photographs, documents, texts, anything they had to offer, anything they thought would add to the growing pile of evidence. Trevor wasn't the only one who had been watching. And in that pile of evidence, buried beneath layers of carefully crafted smiles and public appearances, there was one truth that Meghan could never deny. She was not who she claimed to be. Trevor knew that eventually, the truth would surface. But when it did, it wouldn't be because of a scandal or a tabloid. It would be because he had quietly collected the evidence, carefully saving it for the moment when the world was ready to hear it. The moment was approaching, and when it came, Meghan Markle wouldn't be able to control the narrative any longer. The secrets were already spilling out, piece by piece, just as Trevor had known they would. And when the world finally saw what he had been holding on to, the truth would shatter everything Meghan had worked so hard to build. When Meghan Markle entered the global spotlight as Prince Harry's fiancée, her rise to fame seemed nothing short of fairy tale-like. A beautiful, smart, successful actress from Los Angeles who had built a name for herself on Suits, an activist with a heart for social justice. Who wouldn't love a story like that? The world was ready to embrace her, ready to welcome her into the royal family with open arms. But Trevor Engelson, the man who once knew her better than anyone, saw something different. He saw the cracks in the story, the parts of her past that didn't fit the narrative the world was being fed. Because while Meghan had carefully crafted a public image of grace, poise, and philanthropy, Trevor knew the woman behind the headlines. The one who wasn't afraid to manipulate, to use people, and to hide her past. Her transformation from Hollywood actress to royal fiancée was a spectacle, a media frenzy that blurred the lines between reality and fiction. But for Trevor, it was nothing new. He had watched as Meghan's ambition took her places she never should have gone, played games she was always destined to play. The only difference now was that her stakes were higher. She wasn't just climbing a social ladder anymore. She was about to sit at the very top. As Meghan and Harry's relationship blossomed, so did her ability to reinvent herself. She went from being the girl on Suits, to the woman who could capture a prince's heart, to the activist with the royal title. But Trevor couldn't shake the feeling that Meghan was still playing a part, still controlling the narrative in ways that no one had even begun to understand. She wasn't the sweet, innocent woman the world thought she was. She was a survivor, no, a fighter, who had fought for everything she had. And now, the fight was taking on a new form. The more Meghan's royal status grew, the more it seemed as though she was pushing away the parts of her past that didn't fit the image she wanted to portray. Gone were the Hollywood parties, the late-night networking events, the flirtations with athletes who could help her get ahead. In their place was a picture-perfect image of a woman who wanted nothing more than to raise her children in a world of love and peace, far removed from the scandals of her past. But Trevor knew better. When the media coverage of Meghan and Harry's relationship began to reach new heights, with their every move scrutinized, Trevor began to notice a pattern. Meghan's public persona was becoming more and more polished, more refined. She was being portrayed as the modern-day Cinderella, a woman who had been plucked from obscurity and thrust into the royal spotlight, ready to take on the world with her newfound purpose. But there was something off about the way she was being presented. Meghan wasn't just playing the part of the dutiful fiancée and later, the Duchess of Sussex. She was perfecting it, and that was where Trevor's mind started to race. He knew Meghan. He knew her hunger for fame, for success, for power. He knew how she had once manipulated situations to get what she wanted. It wasn't hard to see that the Meghan Markle he had married was still there, buried beneath the PR campaign, beneath the royal titles. But what was even more disturbing to Trevor was how quickly Meghan's past was being erased. From the moment her engagement to Prince Harry was announced, Meghan had worked tirelessly to reshape her narrative. Her past as a minor actress, her connection to Hollywood's elite, her alleged escapades with athletes. None of that fit the image of the humble, relatable woman the royal family wanted to present to the public. The world was watching as Meghan transitioned from being an actress to a global icon. But what the public didn't see, the parts of her story that never made it into the glossy magazines, was the woman who had used her charm to get ahead, to win over the powerful, to surround herself with people who could help her climb higher. The royal family, for all its traditions and values, had become a new playing field for Meghan. She wasn't there just to serve her new title. She was there to win. And as her star rose, Trevor watched from the sidelines, knowing he had been a part of a version of Meghan that no one else knew. He had seen her ambition up close. He had seen her willingness to do anything to get ahead. He had seen the way she used people, manipulated situations, and carefully constructed an image of herself that didn't quite align with the truth. And while Meghan was busy smiling for the cameras and working tirelessly on her charitable causes, Trevor knew that the truth about her past was still out there, waiting to come to light. But for now, he stayed silent. In the early days of Meghan's royal relationship, Trevor had no intention of exposing her. He wanted to move on. He wanted to leave the past behind, to focus on his own life. But as Meghan's story became more and more distorted, he realized that silence wouldn't be enough. The world was buying the story Meghan was selling, and it wasn't the truth. There was one particular moment that stayed with Trevor. It was the day Meghan and Harry announced their pregnancy. The world celebrated. Fans and critics alike praised the couple for their growing family, for their new chapter in life. But Trevor, watching from the outside, couldn't help but feel a pang of discomfort. Because in that moment, Meghan was being celebrated for something that had always been about control. Control over her image, control over the narrative, control over the people who had once known her. The baby news was the perfect PR moment. It was a way to keep the public distracted, to continue the fairy tale. But Trevor knew it was also a way for Meghan to maintain her grip on the story she had created. She wasn't just giving birth to a child. She was giving birth to a new version of herself, a version that would be adored, admired, and most importantly, accepted. But the cracks were there. Trevor could see them. He saw them in the way Meghan spoke about her past. He saw them in the way she talked about her family, about her relationships. She had carefully curated her image to make it seem as though she had always been this perfect, graceful woman, never mired in scandal, never making mistakes. But Trevor knew better. He knew the real Meghan. He knew the woman who had once used her charm to get ahead, who had once used people for her own gain. He knew the Meghan who had manipulated situations to make herself the star of her own story. And he knew the moment she decided to leave that version of herself behind and reinvent everything. Her rise to royal status wasn't just a personal transformation. It was a calculated move, one that Trevor could now see with perfect clarity. Meghan wasn't just becoming a part of the royal family. She was building her own empire, one where she